This is part 3 of a remarkable 3-part interview with the Chilean miner and Christian José Enriquez. He was speaking at Durham Cathedral in the north of England, talking about his faith in the face of adversity. In this last interview, I also speak to the Reverend Alfredo Cooper, chaplain to the President of Chile and interpreter for José Enriquez. And I begin by asking Reverend Cooper about those skeptics who doubted God's hand in the rescue.
We can only say that even the unbelieving scientists and geologists involved very generously agreed with the believers who said this is a miracle, and would say things like, for instance, Senor Sublete, who was in charge of all the engineering, who himself is not a professing a Christian, but he said, I have to admit that the way that all these things worked out, the way that second drill hit the rock and moved into the mine where the miners were, something strange was happening. And in that way, very generously, he was saying this is beyond my understanding. And in fact, the series of miracles that occurred in answer to prayer, let alone just the morale that was kept up, that in itself is a miracle. And the way in which perhaps the whole of Chile, the whole of the world it seems, galvanized around the rescue effort. The way in which the food just was enough until they were found.
A lot of cynics seem to be saying that if you're saying that God rescued these miners, you also have to accept that God put the miners down there. How do you respond to that?
I find that such an infantile way of understanding God. Obviously, and this is one of the problems, I think. People have not read their Bibles for many a year in Britain. Sometimes people have this kind of strange attitude. No, obviously in a world of suffering, and it is a world of suffering, in this case, the owners of the mine were negligent, selfish, avaricious. Well, that creates problems. And these were the victims of such problems. Now, obviously, there should be good legislation, which has since then been put into place. There should be all kinds of measures taken, as have been in Britain after some of the disasters you've had here. But what the story these miners is coming out is, although we're victims of all these things, Christ heard our prayers and delivered us from the pain and the suffering. And God is not a slot machine. He's not at our beck and call, but he does call us into a relationship with him. So in the midst of the suffering and the difficulty and the pain and the horror, very often created by man, but sometimes the result of a fallen world that is out of tune with nature even. We had just suffered in Chile a gigantic earthquake, the 5th worst earthquake in the history of the world. And we knew what it was to be facing pain, have no immediate slick answers to things, simply having to hug people and be with them in the pain. And somehow through that, God himself manifests himself as well. We had the miners in New Zealand who were not delivered. We don't know all the circumstances there. It was a totally different mine. It was a gas explosion. We don't even know there was time to pray. But we do know that the God these miners are testifying to is a God of love who answers prayer.
Is there anything that you want to say to the Christians of Britain?
¿Hay algo más que usted le quiere decir a los cristianos de Inglaterra?
Bueno, le quisiera decir muchas cosas.
I'd like to say so many things to them.
Pero quiero decirles que el Dios vivo existe.
The living God exists.
Y que es un Dios real, un Dios
He's a real God.
Un Dios que ama a la humanidad entera.
God who loves the whole of humanity.
Un Cristo, un Dios que envió a su Hijo.
He's a God who sent his Son.
Por amor a la humanidad.
For love of humanity.
Y este Dios existe y es real.
This God is alive and is real.
Un Dios poderoso, un Dios que ama
a
los que le aman.
Who is powerful.
Y a todo aquel que toma la actitud.
Loves those who love him.
Que está en su palabra.
He takes the attitude which his word promises.
Dios escucha la oración y la responde.
God hears prayer and responds to prayer.
Quisiera decirles que se acercaran a Dios, que salven sus vidas.
I want to encourage you to draw near to God.
Y se conviertan a Él y que crean en este Dios
to be,
maravilloso.
So that many can be converted and find Christ and enjoy this wonderful God.
Un Dios lleno de misericordia,
God full of
que
mercy,
sana, que restaura,
who heals, who restores,
que liberta al cautivo.
who liberates
Un
the
Dios que
captive,
rompe cadenas, grillos
who breaks chains
de vicio, de
of
maldad.
vice, of evil.